All right, thank you for staying with us. Let's get into some major stories this morning. We're joined by Suleiman Abrima, Executive Director for the Media Foundation for West Africa. Sule, a very good morning to you, sir.
Morning, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Is it the nippy weather? Because your vim, your pep this morning seems to be a bit. I hope you're well.
Yes, I'm well. I think I was down with cold in the last 4 or 5 days, but it's better. So
We
we are
thank
good
the
to go.
Lord. We thank the Lord for that. Let's quickly get into some very pertinent stories this morning. I'd like to start, though, from the end of the rains. They are here again, and it's sickening because every time it pelts, some people have their rooms flooded, others have to scamper about trying to find safety. Today, we're getting into that conversation as far as the Hydrological Services Department is concerned and other bodies, even the Auditor General and its report on things that have been done and things that have not been done. But I know we've spoken about this time and again. When you look at where we find ourselves, what would you like to see in the next few weeks? I say this because sometimes we make it so futuristic. In the next few weeks, in the next month, for example, what would Suleiman Abrima like to see Ghana doing to stem the tide, at least to some little extent?
Well, simply, I would want to see an enforcement of the directive given by the president about 2 weeks ago, that buildings that are standing on waterways blocking the flow of water must be pulled down by all district assemblies across the country. I think it's one thing that at least for once we must see a directive being carried out in total, as opposed to the usual thing where the president speaks fine and then we have no action. I believe unless we commit to these disciplinary actions, we would continue to be confronted by the challenges of flooding anytime it just pours quite a little, because the water has no way of flowing, and therefore it just has to accumulate where it can find any little spots. And quite often that happens to be somebody's house or somebody's compound. And so, yes, unfortunately, people will be affected, but the circumstances we find ourselves in, we have no choice but to do that. So the enforcement of the president's directive is the way to go.
And we've heard, let me just switch the conversation a bit. Let's talk about corruption. And I know that's an issue, an area where you're very concerned. The Office of the Special Prosecutor, and kudos to him, Kisiaja being himself a former lecturer of mine. But apart from not having a board in place and all the other mitigating circumstances, we also hear that the OSP is cash strapped. And all the promises that have been made, I mean, in terms of logistics. I'm sure you recall what Mr. President said when he was swearing in the new special prosecutor. We'll give you this, we'll do that, we'll enable your office. But it appears all those promises, I do not know what is happening to them. Your take?
Well, it's becoming really difficult to discuss matters of our country, because it's almost like every aspect, every issue comes with a lot of depression. It seems that almost everywhere things are getting bad and worse by the day. I've always said that if we have a president or a leader who is truly committed to the fight against corruption, we wouldn't need the Office of the Special Prosecutor, because whatever the Office of the Special Prosecutor is supposed to do, the Attorney General legally can do them. It's just that we are acknowledging, and the President acknowledges, that because whoever becomes the Attorney General and Minister for Justice at any point in time is a member of the ruling party, it may be difficult for such a person to take on members of the same party who commit crime or engage in acts of corruption. And I think that if we, in the advanced countries that we try to look up to, I don't think it's about having somebody appointed who becomes like, look, this is going to be the enemy of the government, and the appointment is done by the same government. That's why we all hailed Martina Midu's appointment, because we thought, well, that was a demonstration by the president that I don't care whoever is taken on, so long as an act of crime is committed, yeah, the person should be prepared to face it. And then we later read and heard about the frustrations that Martin Amidu went through until the appointment of Mr. Kisi Jabe. Of course, people express sentiments about Mr. Jabe's appointment. He is a fine lawyer, a very brainy guy. Kisi has defended me before. And there is no doubt that in terms of competence, he will be able to deliver his mandate. But is he getting the necessary logistics, support, and all of that? Is it not surprising that for almost 8 or 9 months, the board has not been constituted?
The first time under Martin Amidu, it took 5 months. So I guess this time...
What does it take to constitute the board, really? I remember, there's supposed to be a civil society representative who must be a woman. And we had this conversation way back, about 6 months ago, trying to discuss whether we have a name to suggest to the president, as we did under Martin Amidu's tenure. And this conversation is about more than 6 months ago. And you wonder, is it that the president is struggling to find persons who are competent enough to serve as board members of the Office of the Special Prosecutor? Or it's just one of the ways of...
So as we know it, the names have been proffered from the relevant institutions, Shraj, among others, the anti-corruption grouping, that, like you said, a woman to be selected. The names have been presented. Everyone is wondering why the board has not been constituted on the back of the names, because the people you're going to use to form the board are, the presidency is fully aware of the people. So next step, just constitute the board and let the work of the OSP go ahead. But that is the thorny aspect, because for some reason, unbeknownst to the rest of us, it's simply not being done.
Well, I think the reason can only be that the president is not committed to having the OSP function as effectively as it should. That can only be the reason.
Isn't that a bit of a stretch to say that just because the board hasn't been constituted, it means President Akufo-Addo is unwilling to, aid the OSP do its work?
But he is the one who is supposed to constitute the board. It's not me. It's not you. It's not civil society, and therefore, who should we blame? A simple act as putting together and swearing in the board members of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. And if it was not necessary, the law wouldn't have it in place. I think that it is because it is necessary for the functioning of the office. That is why the makers of the law said there must be a board.
Right.
And to the extent that for 8 months, 9 months, there's no board. Who should we place the responsibility on, or who should we blame? He's the person who must do it, and that is the president. Unfortunately, it's becoming challenging to discuss issues of this country without, roping in the president, because again, we all talk about the enormous powers that have been vested in the president, and the fact that there's a need for constitutional amendment to even take away some of the powers. So long as the president continues to wield those powers, he must exercise those powers. Otherwise, he is the one we blame. We cannot blame people who don't have the power to act. Right. And so the office is cash-strapped. The office doesn't have the requisite number of staff to be able to do its work. The board of the office has not been constituted. What else can you say apart from saying, well, those could be the mechanisms in place to disempower the office? And if so, it's the president who must act.
Right. I'll come back to you later when we're wrapping up, after we've looked at the papers. I'll come back to you with two crucial issues. One to do with assets declaration, and the other one to do with the National Cathedral. But let's take a chill pill for now and get into the papers. The Daily Graphic, local textbooks printing begins. 5 printers confirm action. And the local printers have disclosed that they have commenced the printing of government textbooks for basic schools under the new curriculum. The printers are GPAC Limited, a subsidiary of the Graphic Communications Group Limited, the Buck Press, Appointed Time Printing Limited, JK Industries Limited, and SecPrint Limited. Now, the disclosure was corroborated by the Minister of Education, Dr. Yao Osei Educhum. At least we've got some work starting here. We've been talking about the local printers and the printing of our textbooks and restricting it to these local printers to feed our own industry. It's taken off. Good tidings, positives in there?
Yeah, absolutely. That for me is a positive development. It's something that ought to have been in place long ago. But as they say, it's better late than never. We hope that the local printers would discharge their mandate as effectively and acquit that confidence that has been reposed in them to produce our textbooks locally. As I said, this is something that ought to have been done. This is not something that ought to even be um, a headline story because why? I mean, that is printing of textbooks that over the years we've had to contract foreign printers to do. So yes, this is a positive development that the Ministry of Education has taken, and we need to commend them for that. And I believe that, as I said, the local printers would also acquit that confidence reposed in them so that we would not have any cause to say that, well, we ought to have continued with the printing of the textbooks from outside the country.
Let's look at some other stories. Green Ghana Lands Ministry designates seedling centers, and there's also public sector workers overpaid, according to the government statistician. And then ECOWAS determined to sustain constitutional rule. That's according to President Akufo-Addo. I'll just pose two questions to you, but let me go to page 16 as we reflect on those two stories. I find them rather interesting. So, ECOWAS determined to sustain constitutional rule, and our president, who is also ECOWAS chair, has said ECOWAS is determined to restore constitutional rule in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. He said the regional body would also work assiduously towards impressing on the countries to do better with the security and humanitarian challenges they were facing. We've seen, Suleimana, what has happened in the sub-region. Over the weekend, we saw what happened in Nigeria in terms of that church, attack or standoff. Now we see also in Togo another issue where, someone, snatched a security person's gun in a market. Only God knows what would have happened if he hadn't been accosted very quickly. I mean, this could have been another, random shooter, just takes the gun and starts shooting people. It's becoming very serious. We've not experienced it here yet, but I always say, when you see your neighbor's beard on fire, you get water by your side. What is your quick take on that?
Well, the developments in our region are quite troubling. I just don't know how we got into this kind of situation. Boko Haram started in Nigeria, and it was almost like, oh, well, this is a matter that can be dealt with so simply. It's going to be dealt with. And for over a decade now, Boko Haram has grown into something else. And in fact, other fundamentalist groups have infiltrated. And now we are seeing things like, the church shooting yesterday, very, very unfortunate. And I mean, to see what happened and why human beings would do this to fellow human beings, you wonder what goes through the minds of these people who commit such crimes. But this should just alert us. And I believe we also need, as a region, to begin to see these problems as not problems for Nigeria, for Togo, for Burkina, for Mali, or whatever, but collectively begin to act as ECOWAS and confront these issues. Because if we say we would insist on Mali or Burkina doing the best that they can to stem the tide, I wonder whether these countries by themselves will be able to confront the challenges that face them. And it's not actually a challenge for them, it's a challenge for all of us. And I've said before that it's time that collectively as ECOWAS, whether it is our security that come together to confront these challenges in the Sahel region, we have to do that. It appears that the international community, the US, Germany, Russia, and so on, are even on the front lines than, we, those who are affected by it. And I think that it's time we also demonstrate our own capacity to defend ourselves,
Right.
rather than always looking up to the West when it comes to aid, when it comes to loans, when it comes to grants, and then when it comes to peace and security. Yes, we need their support in terms of their capacity, their intelligence, and all of that. But we should also demonstrate that we are standing up for ourselves. And it is time we look at it as a collective problem rather than looking at it as a problem confronting the countries that have so far been hit. I mean, otherwise, maybe very soon it will be our turn. We don't hope and pray for that. But the way things are going, no country is immune, and we
Right.
need to take collective actions on these matters.
What is your take, though, on this next one? Public sector workers overpaid, and the government statistician, Professor Samuel Kobana Enim, has said workers in the public sector are generally overpaid for work done. The government statistician said averagely public sector workers were paid double for their output. He has therefore called for the creation of a public productivity committee of Parliament to work like the Public Accounts Committee and ensure that ministries, departments, and agencies and the public sector in general deliver output commensurate with their earnings. Here's my concern. We've also known over time how public sector workers, look at the increments in their wages, even in light of what we are facing, the economic challenges. 4%, 7%, when Article 71 office holders are getting wide boons. So where does it really lie? I do agree that in the public sector, there are a lot of people who just laze about at the ministries and other places, not doing much. But is this a fair reflection, do you think?
No, I suppose what he wanted to say is that public sector workers are not delivering, as opposed to saying that they are overpaid.
He says they are overpaid by twice. So maybe someone earning 3,000 should be earning about 1,500.
Yeah, I don't know what the basis is, because if you have employed somebody as a teacher or as a nurse or as a worker in the local government service, and the person doesn't report for work, the person comes to work and sleeps around, the person comes to work and just sit down chatting and all of that, on what basis do you say it's a question of the person not delivering, and so the person being paid for work not done? If that is the case, I think that I would say somehow yes, because I have had friends who have had to quit public service because they say, look, we go to work and there's really nothing to be done. We have also seen instances where state agencies that are not producing anything, and yet people continuously get employed. We have Tamawa Refinery. So when was the last time Tamawa Refinery refined any crude in this country? What is the capacity? How much are they refining? But go and look at the staff. And the president or the government appoints a managing director, deputy managing director, director of this, director of that, to go and manage what? So that's the reality. We create jobs for people, job for the boys, so that they get paid. And at the end of the day, no work is getting done, but they get paid because unemployment is on the high and people must have a living. But otherwise, to say that teachers who are earning 1,800, 2,000 in this current situation, where 2,000 is basically what? $250,
right,
and less than $300, and people are earning 2,000, and then we say they are being overpaid.
Yeah,
I think we need to be circumspect, and we need to sympathize with people.
We're moving on from that story, but he did say that earnings average in the public sector about 3,420 for the public sector worker, while output in the sector averages about 1,420 cedis, less than half the earnings. So that's what he puts out there. But of course, I know this discussion could go on forever, especially from public sector workers. But the Ghanaian Times, at Accra Extraordinary Summit, ECOWAS fails to slap new sanctions against 3 West Africa military rulers. We're talking here about Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. There's also stop circulating video of children who suffer ill treatment and abuse. That story is on page 15. It's by Child Rights International. And of course, it has to do with a child who recently, whose father was going to use her for some rituals and all of that, an 11-year-old, and the talk about, a video being taken and images of such children being shown. And Child Rights International has been ferocious about this. National Security warns of suspicious movements at Garu, Bunkpurugu, notifies the Ghana Armed Forces and the police. Let's take a quick look at that, Sule. The Ministry of National Security has raised the alarm on the movement of suspicious persons along the mountainous areas in the Bunkpurugu Nankpanduri district in the northeast region. The same activity, according to the ministry, was ongoing at Garu district in the Upper East region. And the letter from the ministry stated that members of these groupings were aboard motorbikes and dressed in apparel covering their faces and seen heading towards the mountainous areas in the Garu district. And it was advising all security agencies to be on high alert to avert any possible breaches. Again, I'll ask, going back to the security situation, do you feel confident in our security apparatus? I mean, at least we have the intel. You see the National Security Ministry pointing to the fact that, hey, this is going on. Ghana Armed Forces, sit up and all of that. And at least it's also put us in the know publicly so that we can also see something if we do and say something. Your take?
Well, I think for me, the news or the story is really not the alert that has been put out by the National Security Ministry about these suspicious movements that we've all read about. We've all seen the statement on social media and so on. For me, the concern is, how do these things get out into the public domain? Because I'll be extremely worried if these communication materials are actually intentionally put out there to the public. I suppose these are confidential matters.
Right.
If the national security is alerting the Ministry of Defense, the IGP about the activities of some suspicious people, and that happens to be a public document, then I'll be worried, because how people may act. People in the Garu, Bumprugu, Mapanduri areas, somebody could just dress in, try to protect himself with some helmet, wear these kinds of dresses that sometimes we see people wear in Accra, so that in the event of an accident, they will be fine. And then people may just decide to attack them because they say, oh, there are suspicious people moving around.
Right. And you even look at the other side, Suleimana, you look at the other side of the equation. Don't forget that these criminals, like they always do, or terrorists, they would also read. And so once they see that, oh, there's communication that maybe we're going to do something of this sort, they will advise themselves. They would know that eyes are on them. Do you get it? So you're also letting the criminals or whatever, terrorists know that this is going on.
Yeah, and it is becoming a very worrying phenomenon. Whether it's a statement issued by the police about Boku, developments in Boku, and the steps that they are encouraging the regional police command to take in order to prevent something. Look, within a matter of a day or two, you would find the whole statement on a WhatsApp platform. The next time it will be national security talking about what is happening in the Hamile border area and the steps that have to be taken. And then within a matter of a day or two, you would find that in the public domain. So I think the problem is the insecurity of our security measures so far. The ones that we have to know, yes, like they convened this public forum and talked about see something, say something. That's a public campaign. But these ones that are supposed to be intelligence notices, alerts to the defense, interior, and other security agencies, and then we all get to know. That should tell us that there is a lot wrong about the management of these security issues in our country. And the earlier it is stopped, the better. If they are national security and putting out confidential statements cannot be a secret, then how secure are we? I think for me, that's really the problem.
Let's get into other stories quickly. The story in the Daily Guide, it's also replicated by the story in the Ghanaian Publisher newspaper. NDC kicks against Otumfuo lands, the 400 acres that we've been talking about, Otumfuo saved to. And there's also Ghanaian Publisher, Minorities says no to land released to Otumfuo. Those two stories. And I don't know how much of it you've followed and what your quick thinking is, very quickly on that.
Well, the story was initially published by the Fourth Estate, which is run by the Media Foundation for West Africa. And when I read it, I was quite disturbed. And I literally then concluded that, look, almost every state lands in this country originally belongs to a certain family or a certain stool or a certain kinship. And to the extent that the government has become so compassionate suddenly And we are hearing about Achimota Forest, how many acres being released for the Owu family. And now we are hearing about the Ashanti region lands being released back to Otumfo and all of that. Well, if the government has become super compassionate, then I believe that every other state lands must be reverted back to the original owners, so that we don't have state lands. Because why do you release to others and keep those of others? I think that in that way it would be an unfair way of going about things.
Right.
My worry is that this government is acting as if there is no future. This government is acting as if Ghana is coming to an end. I believe that if previous governments had done the same thing that this government is doing, maybe a time may come if we want a piece of land to construct any state facility, we may have to then break down people's private buildings in order to do that.
Suleimana,
it's a very worrying phenomenon.
Right. Let me just do this. BNFT says gold output hits 13-year low. South Africa overtakes country as leading producer in Africa. Republic Press, Ablakwa digs into cathedral project. And Economy Times, Ghana's balance of payments deficit widens. But this is what I want us to do. I'm going to interact with Joshua Asamoah, senior forecaster with the GMET, briefly. Suleimana, when I return to you for your summary comments, I want you to talk about these two matters. One, you remember that Lord Kenya song? Remember that song?
Yes.
Okay. So the chairman of the NPP, Freddie Wasimeu Blay, says, Okafuo Didi. So if we're investing 25 million in the National Cathedral, you say waiting. That's one. And secondly, we found out now, this is a story I know you have good interest in, the Fourth Estate letting us know that as far as assets declaration is concerned, the vice president, together with 90 ministers and deputy ministers of state, have not fully complied with the obligations when it comes to asset declaration. When I come to you, those two quick matters in maybe some 1.5 to 2 minutes. But let me now interact with Joshua Asamoah, senior forecaster with the GMET. Joshua, a very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Pleasure having you. So we've been seeing the weather patterns in recent times. The rains have been hitting like they did yesterday. What can we expect today and moving on? Because the skies still are overcast.
Yes, actually today we are expected some cloudiness to persist for the East Coast. And by East Coast, I mean the Volta to the Greater Accra regions and past few parts of the Central region. And we'll get some pockets of rainfall, but this will not be heavy rainfall. It will just be slight to moderate rain over the coastal parts. So we should expect some pockets of rainfall for the East Coast this morning. But later in the day, areas in the forest zone, so the eastern, the Ashanti, western, north regions are expected to see some thunderstorms and rain activities.
Okay, but you've spoken about today and maybe moving on, but what can we expect in the next week or so? Yesterday, for example, I couldn't dry my stuff because I think it was the night before, the day before, leading into yesterday. I couldn't dry my stuff because of the weather. So what can people expect moving into the rest of the week?
Okay, so every week we issue a weekly forecast for the country, and that is done on Monday. So forecasters across the country will be gathering today via Zoom and then at the head office to come up with a forecast for the week. But before then, what I want us to know, especially for us in Greater Accra, is that it's likely we'll get some rains, like I said earlier today, but will not be too heavy rainfall, just some slight to moderate rain. But for midweek, it looks quite better. So we might get sunny conditions during midweek, that's Tuesday and Thursday. But it's also likely we'll get another rainfall towards the weekend, Saturday or Sunday. It's likely we'll get some rains coming in into southern Ghana. In fact, for most parts of the country, over the weekend looks quite good. But more details on that will be issued later when the weekly forecast is done. But this is the peak of the rainfall season for southern Ghana. And so around this time, it's very likely that we'll get around 2 rainy days within a week. There are some weeks when we'll have drier conditions within the whole week due to some dry spells that we expect within the rainfall season. But around this time, the peak of the rainfall season, every day is a possibility for rainfall.
All right, Joshua. We'll keep tabs on that, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Joshua Samoa is a senior forecaster with the Ghana Meteorological Service, or the agency. Let me wrap with Suleimana Brahma now. So those two-pronged issues, and interesting that Vice President Bawumia, Finance Minister Oforiatta, we're talking about Senior Minister Osafo Mafo, Che Mensah Bonsu, Majority Leader, and others have not fully complied. Your quick take on that as we wrap, those two issues.
The declaration issue is a very widespread issue. Quite, dozens of appointees who have failed to comply with what the law says. In the case of the Vice President and other senior appointees, as you said, they had done part of the declaration and did not fulfill other aspects in terms of when they were exiting power in the last elections, and then they need to have done it again. I think we need to take it quite seriously because it's one of the major mechanisms for dealing with corruption, which remains the major bane of our country. And so the appropriate institutions, SHRAJ, Parliament, and so on, need to begin to take serious actions on these matters so that people would comply with the law. On the cathedral, what can I say? I mean, I mentioned the last time that in a serious leader who wants to see the future of this country and would want to see prosperity for the future of this country would not be committing us to this needless expenditure at this time. I can understand Freddie Blake when he says Okafo Didi. I think for some of these people these days, this is peanuts, or perhaps they don't even see what people are complaining about. When people say times are hard, they really don't feel it. They really don't see it. And so it's nothing for them. I just hope that one day we would get the kind of leader who would think about this country and would want to see this country prosper and would want to leave power.
Are you by implication saying that Akufo-Addo does not want to see this country prosper and is not the kind of leader we need?
Well, I have said it time and again that some of us really had high hopes in President Akufo-Addo. And I believe those who follow my public commentary over the years would agree that some of us really spoke so highly, so well of President Akufo-Addo when he was campaigning to become president of this country. And it's because we were experiencing governance that was not the best for this country under President Mahama. And unfortunately, President Akufo-Addo comes in, and I keep saying that we are seeing worse things happen. Because why would you, at this stage, people are suffering. Children, to maybe quote by Dr. Bawumia, children are suffering, teachers are suffering, parents are suffering, nurses are suffering, suffering everywhere. And the country is really under debt. And then we have a president who decides to pull down state buildings, which have been in place not too long ago, and then to commit state resources, millions of it, to say we are building a cathedral. For who? I don't think that even God will be happy with these actions that is happening. Sometimes one would say, oh, after all, he's a Muslim, but that's not the point. We live with Christians. I have more Christian friends than Muslims. I recruit people in my organization. In the organization, we are just about 2 Muslims out of almost 30 staff. So I have no biases towards any religion, but the right thing must be done. This is what do we really need it for? We were told it's a promise to his Lord. Well, Ghana's battle remains the Lord's, and I believe that battle that remains the Lord's is not the wasteful expenditure that we are seeing now, but that hopefully in the future we would see things getting done appropriately. And that is why collectively as a people, we need to express our dissatisfaction with the governance of this country over the period and not lower the bar so that somebody thinks that what we are saying about Akufo-Addo means that we are saying what was there was better. It wasn't better. We need leadership that will transform this country. And it is not what we experienced and certainly not what we are experiencing now. Hopefully one day we would get the best for this country.
Sule, I love your guts and I love your patriotism. Thank you for being Ghanaian and not being a spectator. Thank you for joining us this morning, Sule, and do have a good day. Suleiman Abrahima, the Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. Quickly, a very happy birthday to you. Today marks another milestone in your life. Priscilla Oforiwa Kwe, today is your birthday. I wish you the very best and God bless you in everything you do. But up next, we serve you sports on the AM show. Stay.